The storm, before silence, the 45th floor of Sterling Dynamics gleamed like a crystal fortress above the Chicago skyline. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the amber glow of sunset, while inside the executive suite, tension crackled like electricity before a storm. Victoria Sterling stood behind her mahogany desk, her silver hair pulled into a perfect chignon, her steel-gray eyes scanning the quarterly reports with the precision of a hawk studying prey. At 38, Victoria had built Sterling Dynamics from a small consulting firm into a multinational powerhouse. She was known for her ruthless efficiency, her ability to close deals that others deemed impossible, and her complete lack of tolerance for weakness. The business world both feared and respected her, and she preferred it that way. A soft knock interrupted her concentration. Without looking up, she knew who it was. Only one person in the entire company knocked with such gentle persistence. "Come in, Natasha." The door opened silently, and Natasha Wells stepped inside, carrying a steaming cup of coffee and a manila folder. At 29, she appeared unremarkable at first glance. Her brown hair was always pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her clothes were professional but plain, and her wire-rimmed glasses gave her an almost scholarly appearance. She had worked as Victoria's personal assistant for 18 months, and in all that time, she had never once raised her voice, missed a deadline, or made a mistake. "Your 4 o'clock meeting with the Henderson Group has been moved to tomorrow," Natasha said, placing the coffee precisely where Victoria liked it. "The quarterly projections you requested are in the folder, and I've scheduled your dinner with the Tokyo investors for next week." Victoria finally looked up, studying her assistant's face. There was something about Natasha that had always intrigued her, though she couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was. Perhaps it was the way she seemed to anticipate Victoria's needs before they were spoken, or how she remained calm under pressure when even seasoned executives crumbled. "The annual charity gala is next Friday," Victoria said, her voice carrying its usual authority. "You'll be attending as my guest?" For the first time since Victoria had known her, Natasha seemed genuinely surprised. Dark eyes widened behind her glasses, and she blinked twice before responding. "I'm sorry, Miss Sterling, but I don't think that's appropriate. I'm just an assistant. Perhaps you meant to invite someone from the executive team." Victoria's lips curved into what might have been a smile if anyone else had been watching. "I said what I meant, Natasha. You'll attend the gala with me, or something suitable." Before Natasha could protest further, Victoria's phone buzzed. Helena Cross appeared on the caller ID, and Victoria's expression immediately hardened. Was her VP of operations, a brilliant but ambitious woman who had been quietly building alliances within the company for months? "We'll discuss the details later," Victoria told Natasha, dismissing her with a wave. As soon as Natasha left, Victoria answered the call. Helena's voice poured through the speaker, smooth as silk but sharp as a blade. "Victoria, darling, I just heard the most amusing rumor. Someone said you're bringing your little assistant to the Sterling Foundation Gala. Please tell me it's just gossip." Victoria leaned back in her chair, her fingers drumming against the leather armrest. The Sterling Foundation Gala was the social event of the year, attended by politicians, celebrities, and the most powerful business leaders in the country. It was where deals worth billions were discussed over champagne and caviar. "It's not gossip, Helena. Natasha will be my guest." There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by Helena's crystalline laugh. "Oh, Victoria, you can't be serious. The board members will be there, along with our biggest investors. What will they think when you walk in with some nobody? Secretary." "They'll think what they always think," Victoria replied coolly, "that I know exactly what I'm doing. But why her? She's so ordinary, invisible, really. I doubt most people in the company even know her name." Victoria's eyes narrowed. Helena's words struck a nerve, though she couldn't explain why. "Perhaps you should worry less about my choices and more about your own performance, Helena. The Asian expansion numbers are still disappointing." The line went quiet again, and when Helena spoke, her voice had lost some of its sweetness. "Of course, Victoria. I was just concerned about the company's image. You know how important perception is in our business?" After ending the call, Victoria stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the city below. Helena was right about one thing. Perception was everything in their world. So why was she insisting on bringing Natasha to the most important social event of the year? The truth was, Victoria didn't entirely understand her own motivations. There was something about her quiet assistant that drew her attention. Something that made her want to see how Natasha would handle herself in a room full of sharks. The conspiracy takes shape 3 floors below. In a conference room filled with polished oak and designer furniture, Helena Cross sat with 3 other executives, each one carefully chosen for their loyalty to her rather than to Victoria. James Morrison, a silver-haired board member with connections throughout Washington, leaned forward with interest. "She's really bringing the assistant?" he asked, his voice filled with disbelief. Helena nodded, her blonde hair catching the light. From the crystal chandelier above, 35, she was stunning in the way that only money and careful maintenance could achieve. Her red dress hugged her curves perfectly, and her smile was practiced to perfection. "Victoria's finally lost her edge," Helena said, her voice filled with satisfaction. "Bringing some nobody to the gala will make her look weak, unprofessional. The board will start questioning her judgment." "What do we know about this assistant?" asked Patricia Vance, the head of human resources. She was a thin woman with sharp features and an even sharper tongue. "Nothing interesting," Helena replied. Natasha Wells, 29, graduated from Northwestern with a degree in business administration. Previous work experience includes various administrative positions at smaller firms. She's been with us for 18 months, and before that, she was completely unremarkable. James Morrison stroked his beard thoughtfully. "Still, we should be careful. Victoria doesn't make moves without reason. What if there's something we're missing?" Helena waved dismissively. "What could there possibly be? She's a secretary who makes coffee and schedules meetings. Victoria's probably just having some kind of midlife crisis." The 4th member of their group, David Park from the legal department, spoke up for the first time. "Maybe we should dig deeper into her background. Run a more thorough check." "Waste of time," Helena said firmly. "We should focus on what this means for us. When Victoria embarrasses herself at the gala, the board will be looking for new leadership. We need to be ready to step in." As the meeting continued, none of them noticed the small recording device hidden beneath the conference table. Its red light blinking silently in the shadows. The following week passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Victoria found herself paying more attention to the details of the gala than she had in previous years. It was simply because the event was particularly important for the company's public relations. Natasha continued her duties with the same quiet efficiency as always, but Victoria noticed subtle changes. There was a new alertness in her assistant's eyes, as if she were constantly observing and calculating. When Natasha thought no one was looking, her posture straightened and something almost regal entered her bearing. On Thursday afternoon, Victoria called Natasha into her office. The late autumn sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the room. "Have you found something appropriate to wear?" Victoria asked, not looking up from her computer screen. "Yes, Miss Sterling." "Yes. I have a dress that should be suitable." Victoria finally looked up, studying her assistant's face. "Good. The car will pick you up at 7 tomorrow evening. We'll arrive together." Natasha nodded, but something flickered across her expression. "Miss Sterling, may I ask why you invited me? I mean, truly. There must be dozens of people more appropriate for such an event." For a moment, Victoria considered deflecting with her usual authority. Instead, she found herself being unusually honest. "Because I'm curious to see what happens when people stop underestimating you." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning that neither woman fully understood yet. Natasha's eyes widened slightly, and for just an instant, Victoria caught a glimpse of something powerful beneath her assistant's quiet exterior. "I won't disappoint you," Natasha said softly. "I don't think you could," Victoria replied, and meant it. The night arrives, the Drake Hotel's ballroom had been transformed into a glittering wonderland. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbows across the crowd of Chicago's elite, while soft jazz music provided the perfect backdrop for networking and deal-making. The who's who of business, politics, and high society mingled with champagne glasses in hand. Their conversations a carefully orchestrated dance of ambition and influence. Helena Cross stood near the bar, resplendent in a black evening gown that had cost more than most people's cars. She held court with a small group of board members and influential guests, her laugh ringing out across the room like silver bells. She had positioned herself perfectly to observe the entrance, waiting for Victoria to arrive with her ridiculous choice of companion. "I still can't believe she's bringing her secretary," murmured Robert Chin, a major investor whose opinion carried significant weight with the board. Helena's smile was sharp as a knife. "It just shows how out of touch Victoria has become. She's forgotten that leadership requires gravitas, not charity cases." James Morrison nodded in agreement. "The board has been discussing some concerns about her recent decisions. This might be the final straw." As if summoned by their conversation, a murmur rippled through the crowd near the entrance. Victoria Sterling had arrived, looking stunning in a navy blue gown that complemented her silver hair perfectly. She moved through the room with her usual confidence, acknowledging greetings with polite nods but not stopping to chat. But she was alone. Helena's eyebrows rose in surprise. Had Victoria changed her mind about bringing the assistant? Had she finally come to her senses? The crowd continued to part as Victoria made her way deeper into the ballroom, and Helena prepared to approach her with a gracious smile and a carefully prepared comment about wise decisions. But then Victoria stopped near the center of the room and turned back toward the entrance, as if waiting for someone. The entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath, and then Natasha Wells walked in. The transformation was so complete that for a moment, Helena didn't recognize her. Gone were the wire-rimmed glasses, the plain ponytail, the unremarkable clothes. Instead, a woman in an emerald green gown glided into the room with the poise of royalty. Her dark hair was styled in elegant waves that framed her face, and her makeup was subtle but perfect, highlighting cheekbones that had been hidden behind those glasses for 18 months. But it wasn't just her appearance that had changed. There was something in the way she moved, in the way she held her head, that commanded attention. She didn't look like an assistant who had been invited to a fancy party. She looked like she belonged there, like she had been born to wear that dress and stand in that room. The crowd, which had been buzzing with conversation just moments before, fell silent. Every eye in the ballroom turned to watch as Natasha made her way toward Victoria, her steps measured and graceful.
Ow.
She didn't look nervous or out of place. If anything, she looked like she was exactly where she was meant to be. Victoria watched her approach with something that might have been pride. And when Natasha reached her side, she offered her arm with a smile that was both genuine and slightly mysterious. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victoria said, her voice carrying easily across the silent ballroom, "I'd like you to meet my colleague, Natasha Wells." The word colleague sent another ripple through the crowd. Not assistant, not secretary, colleague. Helena felt her champagne glass slip from nerveless fingers, but she barely noticed the sound of crystal shattering against the marble floor. Around her, the most powerful people in Chicago continued to stare at the woman. They had all dismissed as invisible, because standing there in her emerald gown, her head held high in mystery dancing in her dark eyes, Natasha Wells looked like anything but a simple assistant. She looked like a queen, who had finally decided to reveal her crown. The dance of deception, the Sterling Foundation Gala, continued around them. But the atmosphere had shifted completely. What had begun as a typical evening of corporate networking had transformed into something far more intriguing. Natasha Wells stood beside Victoria Sterling, like she had been doing it her entire life, accepting introductions with a grace that left seasoned politicians and business moguls slightly off balance. "Miss Wells," said Senator Patricia Wade, a formidable woman in her 50s who rarely found herself impressed by anyone under 40. "Victoria tells me you've been instrumental in several of Sterling Dynamics' recent successes. What's your background?" Natasha smiled, and there was something in that smile that made the senator lean forward slightly. "I've always been interested in how organizations really work, Senator. Not just the public face they present, but the mechanisms underneath that drive real change." "Fascinating," the senator replied, though her eyes suggested she was trying to puzzle out exactly what Natasha meant. "And where did you develop this interest?" "Experience is the best teacher," Natasha said smoothly. "Though I did spend some time at Oxford studying organizational psychology before returning to Chicago. Victoria's eyebrows rose slightly at this information. Oxford had never appeared on any resume she had seen, yet Natasha mentioned it so casually that it had to be true. How many other details about her assistant's background had been omitted from her official file? Across the room, Helena Cross watched the interaction with growing alarm. She had expected Natasha to stumble, to reveal herself as out of her depth. Among such powerful company, instead, the woman was holding her own in conversations with some of the most influential people in the country. "This is impossible," Helena muttered to James Morrison. 6 months ago, that woman was organizing filing cabinets and making coffee runs. No one transforms like that overnight. James was equally perplexed. Maybe we need to take a closer look at who she really is. Before Helena could respond, their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Rebecca Hayes, an investigative journalist whose exposes had brought down 3 Fortune 500 CEOs in the past 5 years. Rebecca was known for her ability to uncover corruption that others missed, and her presence at corporate events always made executives nervous. "Helena," Rebecca said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Enjoying the party?" "Of course," Helena replied carefully. Rebecca had a reputation for turning casual conversations into interrogations. Though I must say, Victoria's choice of companion tonight has certainly surprised everyone. Rebecca's gaze shifted across the room to where Natasha was now speaking. "With Thomas Knight, Sterling Dynamics head of security." "Yes, Miss Wells is quite interesting, isn't she? I've been trying to place her all evening. She seems familiar, but I can't quite put my finger on why." A chill ran down Helena's spine. If Rebecca Hayes was interested in Natasha, that meant the journalist sensed a story. And Rebecca's stories rarely ended well for the people involved. The web begins to unravel meanwhile. Natasha was engaged in what appeared to be casual conversation with Thomas Knight, but both of them knew better. Thomas was a former FBI agent who had joined Sterling Dynamics 3 years earlier, and his trained eye had immediately recognized that Natasha was not what she seemed. "Enjoying yourself tonight?" Thomas asked, his tone conversational but his eyes alert. "It's certainly been illuminating," Natasha replied. "I'm learning so much about the companies." "Extended family?" Thomas studied her face. "Funny thing about families. Sometimes you discover relatives you didn't know you had. Other times you find out people aren't related at all." "Very true," Natasha agreed. "Though I've always found that the most interesting relationships are the ones that develop naturally, without any official paperwork." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, both understanding that a more complex conversation was taking place beneath their pleasant words. Thomas had run a background check on Natasha when she first joined the company, but now he was beginning to suspect that check might not have been thorough enough. "Tell me," Thomas said finally, "what do you think about Sterling Dynamics charitable foundation work?" Something flickered across Natasha's expression so quickly that only someone with Thomas's training would have caught it. "I think charity work reveals a lot about an organization's true values. Don't you?" Before Thomas could respond, Victoria appeared at Natasha's side. "Thomas, I hope you're not interrogating my guest too thoroughly." "Getting to know her better," Thomas replied with a smile that didn't fool anyone. "She's quite remarkable." Victoria's hand settled lightly on Natasha's arm, a gesture that was both protective and possessive. "Yes, she is. If you'll excuse us, Thomas, there are other people I'd like Natasha to meet." As Victoria guided her away, Natasha glanced back at Thomas with an expression that might have been amusement or acknowledgement. Thomas made a mental note to run a much more comprehensive background check first thing Monday morning. Ghosts from the past, the far side of the ballroom. A woman in her early 30s watched the proceedings with intense interest. Amanda Foster had been nursing the same glass of wine for over an hour, but her attention hadn't wavered from Natasha Wells for a single moment. Amanda knew exactly who Natasha was, because she had worked with her 18 months ago at a small nonprofit organization called Justice International. Back then, Natasha had been leading a team of investigators looking into corporate malfeasance, with a particular focus on charitable foundation fraud. The last time Amanda had seen Natasha, she had been preparing for a deep cover assignment that would take her inside one of Chicago's most prominent companies. The target had been a firm suspected of funneling charity donations into private accounts while maintaining a spotless public image. Amanda pulled out her phone and sent a quick text message. "She's here, the Sterling Gala. Whatever she's working on, it's big." The response came back within minutes. "Stay close. Document everything. The board meeting is next week." Amanda slipped her phone back into her purse and moved closer to the center of the room. She needed to get near enough to Natasha to make contact without arousing suspicion. But the woman was surrounded by Chicago's elite, playing her role perfectly. The hunter becomes the hunted. Richard Blackwood stood in a quiet corner of the ballroom, observing the evening's festivities with the detached interest of a predator studying potential prey. At 52, he was one of the most powerful and mysterious figures in Chicago's financial world. His investment firm controlled billions in assets, and rumors suggested his influence extended far beyond legitimate business ventures. Richard had been watching Sterling Dynamics for months, waiting for the right moment to make his move. Victoria. Sterling was brilliant but predictable. Her company had several vulnerabilities that could be exploited by someone with the right connections and sufficient ruthlessness. But tonight, something unexpected had entered the equation. The woman standing beside Victoria was not at all what she appeared to be. Richard's instincts, honed by decades of reading people and situations, told him that Natasha Wells represented either a significant opportunity or a dangerous threat. He approached Dr. Michael Chen, Sterling Dynamics head of corporate ethics, who was standing alone near one of the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Interesting evening, Richard," said conversation ally. Dr. Chen nodded, though his expression was troubled. "It's more interesting than I expected." "Right?" "I've been trying to figure out Miss Wells all night. There's something about her that doesn't quite add up." "Oh? How so?" "She knows too much," Chen said slowly. "I mentioned some of our compliance procedures earlier, and she asked very specific questions about our audit processes. Questions that went well beyond what an assistant should know or care about." Richard's interest sharpened. "What kind of questions? About third-party oversight, verification of charitable donations, that sort of thing?" "She seemed particularly interested in our international operations." A cold smile played at the corners of Richard's mouth. If Natasha Wells was asking those kinds of questions, she was either remarkably well-informed for an assistant or she was something else entirely. Either way, she had just become very interesting to him. The Queen's Gambit as the evening progressed. Natasha found herself in a conversation with Diana Ross, a media mogul whose empire included 3 television networks and a dozen magazines. Diana was known for her ability to spot newsworthy stories before anyone else, and her presence at the gala meant she was hunting for something. "You're quite the mystery, aren't you?" Diana said with a smile that was both friendly and calculating. "I pride myself on knowing everyone worth knowing in this city, but you're a complete enigma." "I prefer to think of myself as a work in progress," Natasha replied smoothly. "How refreshingly honest. Tell me, what do you think about Sterling Dynamics? Reputation in the business community?" It was a loaded question, and Natasha knew it. Diana was fishing for a, quote, something that could be turned into a story that would generate headlines and drive ratings. "I think reputation is like trust," Natasha said carefully. "It takes years to build and can be destroyed in moments. Wisest companies are the ones that never forget how fragile both really are." Diana's eyes lit up with interest. "And do you think Sterling Dynamics remembers that?" Before Natasha could answer, Victoria appeared at her side again, this time with a slight edge to her smile. "Diana, I see you've met Natasha. Hope you're not trying to recruit her away from me." "The thought hadn't occurred to me," Diana replied with matching false sweetness. "Though if she ever decides to change careers, she'd make an excellent journalist. She has a gift for asking the right questions." The comment sent a chill through Victoria, though she kept her expression neutral. What questions had Natasha been asking? And why did everyone seem to think her assistant was more than she appeared? The first crack in the facade is the gala wound. Down, Natasha excused herself to freshen up in the ladies' room. She was touching up her lipstick when Amanda Foster emerged from one of the stalls behind her. "Hello, Tasha," Amanda said quietly, using the nickname that only her old colleagues knew. Natasha's hands stilled for just a moment before she continued applying her lipstick. In the mirror, she met Amanda's eyes with a gaze that revealed nothing. "Sorry, do we know each other?" Natasha asked politely. Amanda moved to the sink beside her. "Justice International misses you, especially the Hoffman investigation team." The Hoffman investigation had been Natasha's last major case before disappearing 18 months ago. It had involved a pharmaceutical company that was supposed to be providing free medications to developing countries, but was actually selling them on the black market. "I think you have me confused with someone else," Natasha said calmly, but there was steel in her voice now. "The board meeting is next Tuesday," Amanda continued, as if Natasha hadn't spoken. "9 a.m., conference room B, they're very interested." "In your progress report," Natasha capped her lipstick and turned to face Amanda directly. For just a moment, the mask slipped, and Amanda saw the brilliant investigator she had once worked alongside. "Some things are worth the wait," Natasha said softly, "and some revelations are worth the risk." Before Amanda could respond, the restroom door opened, and Helena Cross walked in. She took in the scene with sharp eyes, noting the tension between the two women. "Everything all right in here?" Helena asked sweetly. "Of course," Natasha replied, her pleasant assistant demeanor sliding back into place seamlessly. "I was just leaving." As Natasha exited, Helena studied Amanda with growing suspicion. "Do you know her?" Amanda shook her head. "I thought she looked familiar, but I was mistaken." But Helena wasn't convinced. She made a mental note to have Amanda investigated as thoroughly as possible. If there were connections between Natasha and other people at the gala, Helena intended to find them. The night's end the limousine ride back to Natasha's apartment was quiet, but the silence was heavy with unspoken questions. Victoria found herself stealing glances at the woman beside her, trying to reconcile the confident, mysterious figure from the gala with the quiet assistant she thought she knew. "You were remarkable tonight," Victoria said finally. "Thank you. I enjoyed myself more than I expected." "Where did you really go to school, Natasha?" The question hung in the air between them. Natasha turned to look at Victoria, and in the dim light of the limousine, her expression was unreadable. "Does it matter?" "It might." Natasha was quiet for a long moment. "Oxford, Northwestern, and a few other places that aren't on any official transcripts." "What kind of places?" "The kind where you learn things that can't be taught in classrooms." The limousine pulled up outside a modest apartment building, and Natasha moved to get out. But Victoria caught her wrist gently. "Who are you really?" Victoria asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Natasha looked down at Victoria's hand on her wrist, then back up at her face. "I'm someone who believes that the truth always finds a way to surface, no matter how deeply it's buried." She slipped out of the car and walked toward her building without looking back. Victoria watched until she disappeared inside, her mind racing with questions that she wasn't sure she wanted answered. Because one thing had become very clear tonight. Natasha Wells was not who she claimed to be. And Victoria Sterling was beginning to suspect that her entire world was built on foundations that might not be as solid as she had believed. The storm. Breaks Monday morning arrived at Sterling Dynamics like the calm before an earthquake. Victoria Sterling sat in her office, staring out at the Chicago skyline while her mind raced with questions that had kept her awake all weekend. The woman who had walked into the gala as her assistant and commanded the room like royalty was currently 30 floors below, probably organizing her calendar with the same quiet efficiency she had shown for 18 months, but nothing felt the same anymore. Victoria's intercom buzzed. "Miss Sterling, there's a Frank Martinez from the FBI here to see you. He says it's urgent." Victoria's blood turned to ice. Federal agents didn't make unscheduled visits to discuss parking tickets. Send him up. Frank Martinez was a man in his early 40s with graying temples and the kind of steady gaze that suggested he had seen everything the world had to offer and wasn't impressed by any of it. He carried a briefcase and wore the sort of unremarkable suit that federal agents seemed to favor. Miss Sterling, thank you for seeing me without an appointment. I'm Special Agent Martinez, and I'm here about your assistant, Natasha Wells. Victoria kept her expression neutral, though her heart was racing. What about her? When did you last run a background check on Miss Wells? We hired her 18 months ago. Standard procedure?
Oh.
Martinez opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. I think you might want to run another one. The woman working as your assistant is actually Natasha Caldwell, one of the Bureau's most effective undercover investigators. She specializes in corporate fraud, particularly cases involving charitable foundations. The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. She sank into her chair, her mind reeling. That's impossible. She's been my assistant for 18 months. She makes my coffee, schedules my meetings, and she's been building a case against Sterling Dynamics the entire time, Martinez continued. We've been investigating suspicious activity in your charitable foundation's accounts for 2 years. Large donations that never reach their intended recipients. Money that disappears into shell companies. Financial records that don't match up. With actual charitable work, Victoria's mouth went dry. Our charitable foundation is completely legitimate. It's overseen by our VP of Operations, Helena Cross. Yes, Miss Cross. We're very interested in speaking with her as well. Before Victoria could respond, her office door burst open. Helena Cross strode in, her face flushed with anger and her usually perfect composure completely shattered. Victoria, we need to talk. Now, she stopped short when she saw Martinez. And is this Special Agent Martinez, FBI? He said, standing and showing his badge. Miss Cross, perfect timing. We were just discussing you. Helena's face went white. I don't understand. Your charitable foundation has some serious accounting discrepancies, Martinez explained. Millions of dollars in donations that seem to have vanished into thin air. You have evidence suggesting systematic fraud dating back 3 years. That's impossible, Helena said, but her voice lacked conviction. Our records are impeccable. Our audits always come back clean. Martinez smiled. Grimly. Internal audits conducted by firms that receive significant compensation from Sterling Dynamics. We've been conducting our own investigation. Victoria found her voice. Where is Natasha? Agent Caldwell is currently in conference room A with the rest of our team reviewing the evidence she's collected over the past 18 months. Would you like to see her? The Revelation Conference Room A had been transformed into what looked like a war room. Charts covered the walls, showing money flows and connections between various accounts. Computers displayed financial records, and several people in FBI windbreakers were organizing stacks of documents. In the center of it all stood Natasha Caldwell. She had changed from her usual modest assistant attire into a crisp black suit that emphasized her authority rather than concealing it. Her hair was pulled back in a professional style, and she wore contacts instead of the wire-rimmed glasses that had hidden her sharp intelligence for so long. But the biggest change was in her bearing. Gone was the deferential posture of an assistant. This woman stood like someone accustomed to commanding rooms and making decisions that affected lives. When Victoria entered with Martinez, Natasha looked up from the financial documents she was reviewing. Their eyes met across the room, and Victoria saw acknowledgement there, but also something that might have been regret. Miss Sterling, Natasha said formally, I imagine you have questions. A few, Victoria replied, her voice carefully controlled. Starting with whether anything you told me was true. Natasha was quiet for a moment. My feelings were true. Everything else was necessary for the investigation. Victoria felt something crack inside her chest. Your feelings? This case was supposed to take 6 months. Natasha said quietly. I was supposed to gather evidence of the fraud and get out. But it became complicated. How? Because I realized you weren't involved. Helena Cross has been running the fraudulent operation entirely on her own, using her position as VP of Operations to cover her tracks. She's been stealing from the charitable foundation for 3 years, but she's been very careful to keep you out of the loop. Victoria sank into one of the conference room chairs. How much? $12 million, said one of the other FBI agents. Money that was supposed to go to disaster relief, education programs, and medical research. Instead, it went into accounts controlled by Miss Cross and her associates. The trap springs shut at that moment. Thomas Knight entered the conference room with Helena Cross and James Morrison in handcuffs. Helena's perfect composure had completely crumbled, and she was crying mascara streaks down her cheeks. "Helena," Victoria whispered. Staring at the woman she had trusted with so much responsibility, Helena looked up at her with a mixture of defiance and desperation. "Don't understand, Victoria. The company wasn't growing fast enough. Needed capital for expansion, and the charitable foundation was just sitting there with all that money." "Money that wasn't yours," Victoria said quietly. "Money that was supposed to help people. People who would never have known the difference," Helena shot back. "We would have paid it back eventually. We were building something important." "We're stealing," Natasha said firmly. "From disaster victims, from sick children, from people who trusted Sterling Dynamics to do the right thing." Helena's eyes blazed with hatred as she looked at Natasha. "You lying little spy. Do you have any idea what you've destroyed? Sterling Dynamics employs thousands of people. When this scandal breaks, the company will be ruined." "The company will survive," Victoria said, standing up with renewed strength. "Because we're going to make this right. We're going to return every stolen dollar, cooperate fully with the investigation, implement oversight procedures that will prevent this from ever happening again." Helena laughed bitterly. "You naive fool. Do you think your precious board will keep you as CEO after this? Do you think your investors will stick around? This scandal will destroy everything you've built." "Maybe," Victoria replied, "but at least I'll be able to sleep at night." The price of truth. After Helena and James were taken away, Victoria found herself alone in the conference room with Natasha. The other FBI agents had moved to different parts of the building to collect evidence and interview employees. "So what happens now?" Victoria asked. "The investigation continues. There will be trials, probably plea bargains. Helena will likely face federal charges for wire fraud, money laundering, and racketeering." "I met with us." Natasha looked down at the financial documents spread across the table. "There is no us, Victoria. There never really was. I was doing my job. Your job included making me fall in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Natasha's professional composure cracked for just a moment, and Victoria saw the woman who had cared for her, who had brought her waffles and bandaged her wounds. "No," Natasha said softly. "That was never part of the plan, but it happened anyway." "Yes, it happened anyway." Victoria stepped closer. "So where does that leave us? With the truth finally out in the open? With your company's reputation damaged? But salvageable, with criminals facing justice." Natasha paused. "And with me returning to Washington next week," Victoria felt the words like a physical blow. "You're leaving." "This was always temporary, Victoria. I have other cases, other investigations. This is what I do. What if I asked you to stay?" Natasha looked up at her, and for a moment, Victoria saw the same vulnerability that had flickered across her face the night of the gala. "I would say that some things are more complicated than we want them to be." The aftermath of Sterling Dynamics scandal broke in the media 3 days later. Dr. Rebecca Hayes published a comprehensive expose that detailed Helena Cross's systematic theft from the charitable foundation, complete with bank records, forged documents, and testimony from whistleblowers. The headlines were brutal. Sterling Trust shattered. Charity fraud rocks Chicago business world. $1 million betrayal at Sterling Dynamics. But something unexpected happened. Instead of destroying the company, the scandal seemed to galvanize public support for Victoria Sterling, her immediate cooperation with the FBI, her promise to repay every stolen dollar from her personal fortune, and her implementation of unprecedented transparency measures struck a chord with both the business community and the general public. Diana Ross, the media mogul who had questioned Natasha at the gala, published an editorial praising Victoria's handling of the crisis. "True leadership," she wrote, "is not about avoiding mistakes, but about how you respond when mistakes are revealed." The board of directors, rather than removing Victoria, voted unanimously to support her continued leadership. Even the investors, initially spooked by the scandal, began to express confidence in the company's future under her guidance. The final truth, The week after the arrests, Victoria was working late in her office when she heard a familiar knock on the door. Her heart leaped, but when she looked up, she saw Thomas Knight instead of Natasha. "Thought you'd want to know, Thomas?" said, settling into the chair across from her desk. "Agent Caldwell finished her final report today. She's flying back to Washington tomorrow morning." Victoria nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "For what it's worth," Thomas continued, "I've worked with a lot of federal agents over the years. Never seen one struggle with a case the way she did with this one." "What do you mean?" "She cared about you. Really cared. That's not supposed to happen in undercover work, and it made her job a lot harder than it should have been." Victoria was quiet for a long moment. "Did she say anything else?" "She said to tell you that some truths are worth the pain they cause, and that the best leaders are the ones who choose integrity even when it costs them everything." That night, Victoria drove to the airport. She didn't have a plan, didn't know what she would say if she found Natasha. She just knew she couldn't let her leave without trying to bridge the gap between them. She found Natasha in the departure lounge, reading a book and waiting for her flight to board. She looked up when Victoria approached, surprise flickering across her features. "Shouldn't you be dealing with the media circus?" Natasha asked. "Probably, but I had something more important to do." Victoria sat down beside her. "I wanted to thank you. It's for destroying your company's reputation and causing a massive scandal. It's for showing me who I really am. It's for saving me from becoming someone I couldn't live with." Natasha closed her book and looked at Victoria directly. "What happens now?" "I rebuild. We rebuild. Sterling Dynamics will come back stronger and more honest than before. And maybe someday, when your work brings you back to Chicago, you'll find a company worth believing in. And will I find a woman worth believing in too?" Victoria smiled, and for the first time in days, it was genuine. "I hope so. I'm working on becoming her." Natasha's flight was called, and she stood to gather her things. Before she could leave, Victoria stood as well and took her hand. "No, you can't stay," Victoria said. "And I know this isn't how either of us planned for things to end. But I want you to know that meeting you, even under these circumstances, changed my life for the better." "Mine too," Natasha replied softly. They stood there for a moment, two women who had found something unexpected in the midst of deception and betrayal. Then Natasha leaned forward and kissed Victoria's cheek gently. "Take care of yourself, Victoria Sterling. The world needs more leaders like the woman you're becoming." And then she was gone, walking toward her gate without looking back. Victoria stood there watching until Natasha disappeared from view. Then she walked back to her car and drove through the Chicago night toward a future that was uncertain but honest. 6 months later, Sterling Dynamics had not only recovered from the scandal, but had become a model for corporate transparency and ethical business practices. Victoria had kept her promise to repay every stolen dollar, and the charitable foundation was now run by an independent board with complete financial transparency. She never heard from Natasha again, but sometimes, late at night in her office, Victoria would remember the woman who had walked into her life disguised as an assistant and revealed herself to be something far more extraordinary. A queen who had taught her that true power comes not from hiding the truth, but from having the courage to face it, no matter the cost. The end.